I'm so ridiculously excited to play Resident Evil Requiem, but first let's benchmark it a little bit for you guys, and I am doing it at launch with the full release version of the game, not pre-release builds or anything like that, so this is the full-on user experience. And what are we going to be testing this out on? Well, the recommended GPU for the game is an RTX 2060 Super 8GB or a Radeon RX 6600. I don't have a 2060 Super 8GB, but I do have an RTX 3060 12GB. So if we look at something like the Tech Power Up relative performance chart, that puts me a little bit ahead of the recommended GPU, but we're in the same ballpark. Now, if you want to upgrade to crush this game, you should check out jawa.gg rather than try to buy something new. The new GPU market sucks right now. Like even buying an RTX 5060, $340 for the lowest price, and it goes way up from there. Well, if you check out jawa.gg, get something like the 3060 Ti, which is almost as powerful as an RTX 5060 for $225. That is a much better deal. They have tons of other GPUs available as well. And as if you don't want to just get to the GPU, you want to get a whole new system, they have tons of custom builds. You can find exactly what you're looking for specific performance in specific games, certain parts, shot by theme, and you can fund your upgrade by selling your parts on Jawa. Jawa will even go the maximum convenience option for you. You can sell them your CPU or GPU directly. You can click this button to get an instant offer, or you could become a Jawa seller, set your own price, create your own listing. Tons of great reviews, and I can save you $10 off your first purchase using code OWEN10. But anyway, the rest of my system that I'm going to be testing out here is going to be a Ryzen 5 5600, which is above their recommended Ryzen 5 5500, and I do have 32 gigabytes of RAM in the system because that didn't used to be a luxury. It was reasonably affordable. Oh my goodness, prices these days. Anyway, so let's go ahead and take a look at the kinds of settings we have available here. So right now I'm on a 1440p display. And I'm capturing on a capture card on a second PC, so the capture has nothing to do with the performance that we're seeing here. That's being captured separately. And the first thing I usually like to do is see what a game will auto-configure to. But notice this, if I try to auto-configure, first of all, it asks me about prioritize quality or performance. If I try to prioritize quality, and again, we're on the RTX 3060 12GB right now, it measures your PC's performance, but when I tried this a second ago, it gave up. It said I need to lower my monitor resolution. Yeah, so it failed. So I'm wondering if it just feels like the 3060 can't handle the 1440p display, so we might need to customize some things here, or maybe we could start out at 1080p and kind of go from there. Although I am curious if we auto-configure for performance, if we get a better option. So we're measuring PC again. I haven't actually tried this yet off camera. Let's see if it's able to do the trick. And, oh, I think we might be getting something. Are we getting something? By the way, if you're noticing this popping up in the bottom left-hand corner, that is a overlay I've enabled through a registry edit to allow us to see the internal rendering resolution and the output resolution and model that's being used by DLSS. Anyway, so it looks like it just kicked on DLSS for us as it did this, and it says that graphic settings have been reconfigured to optimal settings for your PC. So basically, it gave up configuring quality settings for 1440p, but performance it was able to do. Let's go ahead and see what it defaulted to. Now, they have VSync on. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Now, keep that in mind. If you see screen tearing, that's a capture issue because I'm capturing 60 FPS footage rather than playing on, in person, you'd be playing on a variable refresh rate display. But this way, we'll be able to see the true performance limits and not be held to a 60 FPS limit. Okay, so looks like, again, we're on the 1440p output with variable refresh rate. Motion blur defaults to on. I'll leave it on just to trigger you guys because you'll hate it. Ray tracing defaulted to off, but hair strands are on. This game has a very nice hair strand system. The game also has path tracing, which probably not the way to go on the 3060, although maybe we can kick it on at some point and see how it goes. Graphics quality looks like we just defaulted to normal settings, although they do go up to high or max. And upscaling quality has defaulted to low, which is prioritize performance. So I'm assuming that's like performance mode DLSS. And again, I have the overlay, so we'll be able to tell what that internal rendering resolution is. For 1440p at performance mode, usually that would be a 720p internal resolution, upscaled to the 1440p output. Lighting and shadow quality went to normal as well. There's also an advanced menu settings where you can look at a whole bunch of individual settings, and there you do actually see the upscaling normal performance mode settings and things like that. Frame generation is off. It looks like the reflex defaulted to on. There's all of those settings. So this is what the game decided was the appropriate way for an RTX 3060 to be trying to play at 1440p. Let's go ahead and launch the game. I guess we'll play at standard modern, I guess. And we'll see how it goes. Honestly, when I actually play this, I usually play Resident Evil games on hard modes, but for the purposes of benchmarking a bit, I'll probably do this and then go back and restart the game. So I am noticing the overlay telling me we're at 720p, going to a 1440p output. And we're currently nearly 100 FPS, but we're on cutscenes. I don't know how much this is pre-rendered. There was a little bit of a frame time blip. We do have a frame time graph going here, as there was a camera cut, but this isn't actually gameplay, so I'm not too worried about that. Now, to avoid spoilers and things, I think I am going to skip into actual gameplay, and then when I actually play this game, I'm going to take in all the cutscenes and all of that. So it looks like we're still around 90-something FPS here. I'm going to go ahead and skip and hold that as well. All right, this appears to be actual gameplay, and I'm noticing that things are looking a little pixelated in the puddles here. And the overlay in the bottom left, it might be a little hard to see on the video, is showing 720p internal resolution going out to a 1440p output. But we're at 76 FPS, and honestly, other than the pixelation in the puddle, this looks pretty good. Now I'm standing still for now. Let's go ahead and kick on the frame rate averages. The middle is the average. The one on the right is the 1% lows, and the one on the FPS number on the left is the current frame rate. You can also see the CPU usage by core and the GPU usage. We appear to be mostly GPU limited here, as it's close to 100% utilization. And man, I think the city scene looks quite good, even at the graphic settings that we're at here, and we are over 80 FPS. Looks like we're on DLSS preset K, so it doesn't look like it's using one of the newer model, DLSS 4.5 models. Otherwise, performance mode would probably be using preset M. But yeah, I think that the city town area is looking pretty great here. Even at these reduced settings, other than the kind of the pixelation and breakup in the puddles and rain. So far, like I said, looks like performance is pretty good. Cutscene here dropped to near 60. 1% lows are still over 50. I'm going to go ahead and skip through the more cutscene type bits just to kind of get a little bit more of an idea of overall performance. And yeah, in these smaller areas, this is where Resident Evil, RE Engine, which I guess is not Resident Evil Engine, but RE Engine shines in these more enclosed environments. Over 100 FPS in this area currently. Yeah, the current settings, the puddles don't look great. That's probably something that the ray tracing would help clear up pretty considerably. But the actual environment and everything, I think, is looking quite good, and the performance is extremely solid. To the point where, I'm sure there's more demanding areas and all that, but we could probably actually turn up graphic settings despite being at 1440p output here. Looks like they have the black levels better than in previous Resident Evil games. I play on an OLED monitor, and I noticed in some of the previous Resident Evil games, the black levels, even in the darkest areas, were kind of gray, and that was disappointing, especially for a horror title. That appears to be better from what I'm seeing so far here. So that is good, especially for the atmosphere in this type of a game. Yeah, it looks like interior areas are performing extremely well. So I'm actually wondering if a more interesting thing to do here would be to walk down that city street, but again, like restart the game on that city street, but do it with some other graphic settings enabled. So I'm actually going to restart the game as I apply different graphic settings, etc. And let's run down that street a few times and then maybe switch up the hardware that we're testing. Okay, I've restarted the game, and this time I've decided to kick on ray tracing, but just at normal, which is the lowest ray tracing setting. But everything else was the same settings, and still with the DLSS performance, we're still in the 3060. Mainly because I was curious if these puddles and rain reflections would look noticeably better. Still noticing some kind of breakup in that, so I'm also wondering how much of that is the rendering resolution. And it's looking like we're holding very close to 60 FPS in this area with, multiple NPCs and moving vehicles, etc. Like, I'm sure there's some areas of the game that are going to be more demanding than this, but this seems pretty representative. There being a good amount happening on the screen, so that's why I think this is a good area to test. Now I'm going to go ahead and see about if we just pull up the rendering resolution, if we'll notice those puddles look significantly better. So I'm going to go all the way to DLAA, so that is native 1440p. I'm not expecting good performance, but I'm curious what it does to the image quality in those puddles. So while it's still not perfect, I do think that a part of that issue, I think, was kind of a low rendering resolution on that. I think this is less distracting looking, but as you can see, we're now closer to 30-ish FPS. So let's go ahead and play with that a little bit more before we change some other settings besides just looking at this ray tracing option. So let's bring it down to, usually for me at 1440p with modern versions of DLSS, I find the balanced setting to be generally the, pretty balanced trade-off between image quality and the frame rate that you get. So yeah, you can see here we're now kind of in the mid-50s. Yeah, the puddle's not looking perfect, but game's fairly responsive. We do have the ray traced reflections now, but as you can see on the normal level of reflections and with this much upscaling, there's definitely some distracting breakup to those ray traced reflections. So I don't think that the RTX 3060 is going to be doing the super heavy ray tracing kind of stuff. But maybe just for fun before, should we try the path tracing on the 3060 just to see what happens? All right, we kicked on path tracing. I left everything else the same, although I'm noticing that the game automatically, when you enable path tracing, switches you into DLSS performance mode, even if you were at a different DLSS setting previously. And as you can see here, even with performance mode upscaling, we're well short of 30 FPS, but yeah, the ray traced reflections do look a lot sharper, but it's looking like this may be a bit out of reach of our RTX 3060. What if we went down to the down to 1080p? Can I not change the display resolution while I'm in the game? Do I have to actually be in the menu when I'm doing it? No, there it is. Okay, I was just on the wrong screen. So let's drop down to 1080p maybe, just to see if that kind of solves our problems. Well, it does get us to about 30 FPS. So it does look like if you're at the kind of normal graphic settings plus then path tracing and DLSS performance mode, you can kind of play with the path tracing at around a 30 FPS experience, which, well, obviously that's not the ideal way to play the game. If you are wanting to play around with the path tracing on a 1080p display, it looks like you at least have the ability to do that. Maybe play on a controller and the 30 FPS feels a little smoother than it does on a mouse. Anyway, not going to be the way I play the game. But let's go ahead and try out the maximum settings that are not path traced or ray traced and see how that performs on this GPU before we switch to a different PC. Okay, this is the game's maximum graphics preset, and it's got everything turned up except for ray tracing though. So ray tracing is off, not just path tracing off, but ray tracing is off. But other than that, I slid all of the graphics quality settings to the max, including the upscaling quality. So what that did is it just turned upscaling off. So I'm assuming we're using the game's native TAA. And interestingly, at let's see, we are at 1080p resolution, but it looks like at 1080p resolution max settings in this area, which again, I'm sure if you play the game long enough, you'll find more demanding areas, but lots of NPCs on screen here. There's moving vehicles, all of that. And we are averaging over 60 FPS in this area. And I think the game does still look quite nice without having to rely on the ray tracing to get there. Although, of course, those path traced reflections and all that in the cars and puddles certainly looked nice. But yeah, it absolutely looks like even on a GPU like the RTX 3060, playing the game at maxed out conventional settings without the ray tracing involved does pretty well. Looks like cutscene here does drop into the 50s and such. And I'm sure, like I said, that you can find probably a more demanding area of the game. But I think we should test out some other hardware before we're done with the video. I switched over to my high-end PC, so the CPU is not going to be a limiting factor. We can focus on the GPUs, and I decided to put in a 5060 Ti, but the 8GB version, since the 16GB version is incredibly expensive now with the RAM shortage, and I'm curious how this game will do. I'm noticing that if I keep it at the max settings that we were just playing on with the 3060 just fine, I'm getting this red warning from the game that we might have some problems. Let's go ahead and try out the 1080p max settings that we were getting with the RTX 3060. And I believe everything went ahead and just kind of saved and carried over here. It looks like it did. And this is with ray tracing off, but otherwise maximum settings. And let's go ahead and just make sure that's all max. So that's what we were doing on the 3060, which is much less powerful, but has more VRAM. And I'm just curious what is going to happen as we load in here. Now, one thing with VRAM issues is sometimes you only see it after a longer period of play than is reasonable to capture for this style of video. So we'll have to see what happens, whether there's any problems that are just immediately apparent, or whether it is something that we notice more if you play the game for a long time and eventually the game starts stuttering or something like that. It does feel like it's having a little more issues just loading into this scene, but now we are into the scene. Let's see how we do. I'm gonna go ahead and skip into this. Wait, did this default to having a bunch of frame generation on? Okay, yeah, the way my frame time graph is going crazy, I feel like it defaulted to having a bunch of frame generation on, which is not what I'm looking for. Not because I'm saying you can't play the game with frame generation, but more just that I don't think that's a good way to benchmark games and test how they're working out. So we're going to kick frame generation off and then get back in here. And also just, you can always just tell if your base frame rate is, 50 to 60 FPS, it feels pretty good even after you kick on frame gen. It's more about whether you prefer that experience or not. So it just doesn't need to be part of the benchmarking, in my opinion. So we're in the mid 80s, and I'm not seeing any immediate issues. Sometimes you spot like lower textures and things like that. Okay, actually now issues all over the place. Okay, look at that stuttering. Yeah, big stuttering happening. So, okay, we definitely saw it. So if you're feeling like this game is stuttering, there's a chance that you are out of VRAM, because we saw the less powerful RTX 3060 handle that same exact scene. I even looked at the car, right? Completely fine. Whereas the 8GB but much more powerful 5060 Ti is having some problems with that. Now things have settled down, right? But a lot of times that's what I've noticed with RE Engine games and previous Resident Evil games on 8GB cards, is that the game can feel stuttery when higher VRAM cards don't, and feel a lot smoother. So yeah, I think that's going to be kind of my conclusion on the 8GB card. So let's turn down the settings a bit and see if that gets things under control. I asked it to auto-configure for the 5060 Ti just to see what would happen and prioritize the visual quality. It went with normal on everything except max for the resolution scaling. I did notice that it did go ahead and kick frame gen back on automatically, so I will go ahead and turn that back off. But let's go ahead and load back in. And you actually kind of have to start new because the auto saves at a different spot. But let's go ahead and see if we still see any kind of stutters in that same area. Now, even if we don't, that's no guarantees that we won't see them anywhere. But let's see if this at least plays to that same area a little bit smoother this time without that. Also, just overall frame rate is a lot higher. Wow. And frame gen is not activated. I do have that turned off. So yeah, I'm looking over at these cars and things where I was having those problems on the higher graphics settings, and it's looking like those are smoothed out here, and overall frame rate's very high. So yeah, cool. Looks like overall, man, if you play it just the normal settings without ray tracing and stuff, this game is extremely performant. I know this is only 1080p and it's on a 5060 Ti, which is a pretty powerful new card, but overall frame rates are looking pretty high. Let's go ahead and see about turning up to 1440p. Notice I was not using any upscaling. That was native TAA at 1080p. This is now native TAA at 1440p. So yeah, it's looking like on a modern card at just normal graphics settings, The 1440p native, you don't need to rely on upscaling. 100-ish FPS here, so even if there's more demanding areas, it'll be just fine. The only problem I'm running into is the 8GB card just does need to have the settings reined in a little bit. Usually in RE Engine games, if you just bring the textures down, it can help out, but I haven't played through this one in particular enough to be sure that would be enough to keep things under control. Notice there wasn't the stutter on the camera cut this time either. So this does seem to have got things under control. Everything looks like a nice buttery smooth frame time graph. Let's go ahead and try another GPU. Okay, I've swapped in the 5070 now, still on the high-end benchmarking platform for the rest of the system. This has 12 gigabytes of VRAM and some additional performance. So we're going to start out with the same settings we just ended with on the 5060 Ti, which is kind of the normal settings, and then 1440p native. I've made sure that the DLSS frame generation is turned off. There's no DLSS at all at these settings. Let's go ahead and load in. It did do the shader compilation step at the start. And again, it'll also be good to confirm that switching in a new GPU, we don't see those stutters on a card with more VRAM, just to be sure that wasn't just like a shader compilation thing that just for some reason showed up on the one card but not the others. But yeah, looking over in this area, this is the first time this GPU has been in this system. And looking around, same kind of stuff I did on that 5060 Ti. Although wait, we are on the lower settings. These aren't the max settings at this point, but anyway, it's looking like we are getting nice high frame rates, well over 100 frames per second, and this is native 1440p resolution, no upscaling tricks needed or anything like that. But that means I think we can now test out turning these settings higher. So let's go ahead and kick things up to the maximum non-ray trace settings and then push it up from there. If we have the performance headroom to do so. So we're going to swap everything up to max here, except that's going to kick on the frame gen, kick that back off, and then I will restart the game for good measure to be sure everything applies. This is great. The 5070 is delivering over 100 frames per second in this area. Again, I'm sure if you play the game, you can find something more demanding, but lots of NPCs on screen, kind of an open area. There's cars driving by. And this is the max non-ray trace settings, and there's no upscaling happening here. This is native 1440p, native TAA. And I think that that is pretty awesome. So there's a lot of headroom here for if areas of the game do get more demanding than this. Now, I think it'll be fun to try out some ray tracing settings, and let's work our way up. And as we kind of see how the performance and maybe even VRAM usage, sometimes 12 is not enough for path tracing with everything maxed out in some games. So let's switch up to ray tracing normal and load in and see how that goes. So ray tracing normal in the same scene. Everything else is still set to max. Remember when we were on the 3060, I think I was at more like the medium normal settings when I kicked on ray tracing rather than the max settings plus ray tracing, if you're thinking back to comparing to my 3060 testing. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the actual gameplay bit. So definitely not as high, but like 80-ish FPS. This is very playable, and this is still no DLSS unless it automatically kicked something on, which I don't think it did. I mean, the ray trace reflections compared to like the path tracing, you can tell that, you know, there's a little bit of graininess and lower resolution to the reflections, but you're certainly getting a lot more detail in the reflections than you did without the RT on. And overall, mid-70s, and again, this is native resolution. I think that's pretty impressive. Let's go ahead and double check that it didn't actually kick on any upscaling because this is with ray tracing enabled. No, that is no upscaling. So let's actually kick on DLSS quality and see what that does, because oftentimes DLSS can actually sometimes look better than a native TAA implementation. Now, again, like I said, the detail in the resolution of the reflections and everything isn't insane. Got a little bit of a stutter right there as I turned around. Interesting. And actually, VRAM usage is pretty high right now, guys. We are at 10.5 gigabytes showing on the utilization, but sometimes some amount is reserved, so you can spill over. So I'm curious if we're actually pushing near the limits of the 12 gigabyte card. Interesting. Of course, could just be that the game has some stutters here and there. But overall frame rate numbers, so the actual compute power required for this kind of stuff, is looking pretty dang good. So let's go ahead and back out and kick things up a little bit higher. Let's go ahead and change the ray tracing settings to high. Ooh, and it is giving us a VRAM warning here, guys. Interesting. So yeah, we are getting the VRAM warning by going up to ray tracing high. Normal, I wasn't getting the warning, but high, it is giving me the warning. So yeah, we were definitely right on that borderline, and this might have pushed us over. Let's see how this particular scene holds up. You do have to go back to the menu to change most of the graphics settings, by the way, to make sure that they apply and all that. Anyway, let's go ahead and load in here. And okay, definitely taking a heavier toll. We're kind of in the 80s to 90s rather than well over 100. And remember, I left DLSS quality on. So this is with DLSS quality kicked on, but 1440p output. It's not super aggressive settings or anything. Looking into the reflections and all that, overall, you can tell that it's not just ray traced reflections. There's more ray tracing going on than that, I believe, because the lighting looks different to me as well. And yeah, overall performance numbers look good. So again, they're giving that VRAM warning, and I believe them. So if I imagine some stutters could be in store, maybe turn down textures a bit or something if you were going to be trying to play at these settings. The performance certainly seems to be there. But let's go ahead and back out and try the path tracing mode on the 5070. I'm assuming we're going to end up having to drop some VRAM somewhere. But first, let's just see what happens if I try to max it out. So ray tracing all the way up to the path tracing mode. Notice that this does automatically set some of the upscaling settings, and it gives you that warning when you do it. And let's go ahead and check what it did. So yeah, it does automatically kick on frame generation, which I'm going to go ahead and turn off. And it looks like it kicked upscaling. It actually left it at quality, so it didn't go super aggressive on that. And I'm going to go ahead and go actually all the way down to perform. Well, let's leave it on quality for now for more of a performance comparison to what we were doing before. But I think I will restart the game just to be sure path tracing kicked in properly and we flushed the VRAM and all that. I've spotted what's either a bug or if this is intended behavior, I don't like it. So after restarting, I noticed that the DLSS mode, because I double checked all the settings had stayed applied, DLSS switched to performance when I had it on quality. So it's looking like when you're in the path tracing mode specifically, because it was not doing it on our other graphic settings, but in the path tracing mode specifically, the game, when you restart the game, it goes to DLSS performance mode. I don't like that, forcing that behavior. Even if it wants to default to DLSS performance, if I manually change it, I would expect my graphic settings not to be messed with in between runs. Anyway, I'm going to go with the performance mode upscale just to see what the performance is, but then I do want to try moving it back up to quality just to see what happens to get more of a direct comparison to the ray tracing modes we were testing earlier. Again, I do have the frame gen off, I believe. Let's double check it didn't sneak that in there. I think it kept it off. But again, it makes me nervous whenever games start changing things without my permission on the restart. Okay, frame generation is still off. It's still giving us the VRAM warning. Looks like we are around 60 to 70 FPS, though. This is with DLSS performance mode, so 720p internal rendering resolution. You can tell the ray traced reflections do look nicer and things like that. But we are at a lower internal rendering resolution. But it is close to 60 FPS here. Again, some other scenes in the game might be more demanding. We are dipping into the mid-50s here. We kind of get some averages here and look at the 1% lows. But honestly, the DLSS performance with ray reconstruction kicking in, I could see somebody who wanted to play with the path tracing to maybe find this a acceptable way to go. You could kick on 2x frame gen from here. And I think the latency you'll still feel okay because you're coming from a 50-ish baseline. But the internal resolution does seem a bit low. So let's go ahead and kick it up to balanced and see what happens. So balanced mode, and yeah, performance drops to 50-ish, kind of into the 40s and 50s. Again, oftentimes 50 FPS is an okay baseline for frame gen. Everybody has their own kind of personal preferences on that, so it's pretty subjective. You could make your own decisions. We're at the bit higher internal res, so I mean, I think the reflections with the path tracing mode do look pretty impressive. Gotta be honest. So things are looking pretty nice. And let's go ahead and go to DLSS quality. I feel like frame rates are just going to drop too far to really make sense here. But let's go ahead and check it out. So DLSS quality, yeah, kind of into the lower 40s now. Again, I know some people who just kick on frame gen from here and they feel fine. I know other people who can't stand it from this low of a baseline. I'm not a huge fan from this low of a baseline myself, so... yeah, I could see some people maybe wanting to go that route, but others not. I think maybe at least being on the DLSS balanced was the better choice here. You can see that path tracing is certainly a lot heavier than the non-path traced ray tracing settings. Okay, let's test out... I think I can fit in 2 more graphics cards because of Denuvo. They only let you test 5 systems in a 24-hour period, and we've made 3 hardware swaps. So let's get an AMD card in here. The 9070 is the closest price competitor to this 5070, so why don't we take a look at that? All right, I put it in the 9070, and I noticed something weird, although after clicking Auto Configure Graphics Settings, it fixed it. Ray tracing was just simply missing from the menu, probably because I had recently selected path tracing and then swapped in this GPU, and maybe it was still trying to be on the path tracing mode, which it doesn't look like the AMD card supports. So when I clicked Auto Configure, ray tracing popped back up as an option, although not with the path tracing settings. So I think that's what was going on there. I'm also noticing that under upscaling technology, I can choose between FSR1 and FSR4. So I do have FSR4 available in this game as a option here. So I think what we're going to do is first start with ray tracing turned off, but with everything else set to maximum. And then we'll restart the game to be sure everything's applied properly and test that out. All right, here we are at the maximum non-ray traced settings in the game, and performance is looking nice and high. Seems a little bit higher than what we were getting on the 5070, which is the closest price competitor. Last time I checked, they were actually pretty much exactly the same price on the new market between the 9070 and 5070. Let's go ahead and double check everything is proper here. We are at 1440p, max everything except ray tracing off, and the upscaling is set to off, which means I think we're using the game's native TAA. Now, we do have FSR4 available, so I could try out using FSR4's native AA mode, which should be heavier than TAA, but oftentimes can look nicer, and honestly, performance still... pretty high here. So it's looking like if we want to play this game without ray tracing on the 9070, there's going to be no issues. Because again, even if this isn't the most demanding area of the entire game, there's a lot of headroom here for a very good experience. And again, I don't think any frame gen should be off. I don't think any frame gen should be on. I mean, let's double check that. It's not giving us any problems. Yeah, frame generation is set to off. Okay, let's say, what if we did actually want to use FSR4, but like quality or something like that, see what that does for performance. And yeah, we're up here in the 160 plus. So yeah, if you're on 165 hertz, 1440p display, I think this is going to be right at home there. So I think the next question then is, what if we did want to kick on some of the ray tracing? Now, the path tracing is not going to be an option, but AMD's 9000 series cards are no slouches when it comes to ray tracing in general. So let's try the normal ray tracing. Go ahead and kick that on. And then if that's working well, we'll try kicking on the high ray tracing. Now, right now I still have FSR4 quality enabled, but if our performance is good enough, we'll try turning it off and just going back to native. Let's see where we're at once we load in. And it's looking pretty good. Yeah, so we are over 100 FPS. This is FSR4 quality with the ray tracing set to normal. Again, though, at this level, the RT reflections are kind of grainy, which isn't my absolute favorite. Let's see if going back up to native resolution helps with that. So Let's try out using the, let's just turn upscaling off and see how that goes. So upscaling off, we're still around 90 FPS here, dropping into the 80s with motion. Yeah, still, again, just the lowest ray tracing setting is just not super high quality reflections. You do get a lot more stuff reflected than the SSR does, so still might want to consider using it. The performance headroom's certainly there. This is native 1440p with ray tracing enabled, and we're over 90 FPS with lots of NPCs and everything on the screen. Let's go and kick up to the higher ray tracing setting and see if we can handle that. So high ray tracing. Looks like it's letting me enable that here. Let's go ahead and load in. But yeah, path tracing is unavailable on AMD cards, at least at launch. Who knows if that'll be something that they eventually enable. Because some games that have path tracing have allowed AMD to use it, but there have been some that kind of block them out. All right, remember this is no upscaling. Native 1440p on the high ray tracing, but not path tracing. We are over 60 FPS, getting lots of stuff reflected. And yeah, so perfectly usable here. And of course, we could actually use some FSR4. So let's try out FSR4 quality maybe to get started and see what that gets us. Yeah, hits about 100 FPS now using FSR4 quality with max settings plus the highest ray tracing that is allowable on the AMD cards. So yeah, the 9070 certainly has a lot of headroom here. And of course, we could try out more aggressive upscaling, but to be honest, I need to go to bed soon, and I have one hardware change before Denuvo gets mad at me. So let's just throw in the 5090 and try to max out 4K path tracing and see what happens. Okay, so I put in the 5090, but I think before we max everything out at 4K, I think it'll be fun just to see how it does at the same 1440p settings we were just trying on the 9070. So 1440p, ray tracing high, so this is ray tracing on, just not path tracing. Everything else maxed out, and I switched, actually I just switched upscaling completely off. We'll be able to try out some DLSS as well. So we'll just see how we do at these settings before we kick on full-on path tracing mode, and then, of course, try out 4K as well. So what happens if you throw a, man, I was going to say $2,000 GPU in there, but checking prices recently, closer to $4,000 graphics card. Prices are insane, guys. What happens? Well, actually, it looks like, 130-ish FPS, but remember, this is the high ray tracing, not just the normal and not ray tracing off. And this is native with no upscaling. And we're over 120 FPS at that native 1440p. So remember cards like the 9070, I think I was around 60 FPS or so when we were trying out those settings. And then this is with no upscaling turned on. So let's go ahead and kick DLSS to quality and see what that does for us. So now we're up, 170-ish frames per second in this scene, again, 1440p. Let's go ahead and switch up to 4K now. So if we go to 4K, looks like DLSS quality at 4K, we're a little over 100 frames per second. Let's actually go ahead and see how we do at native rendering resolution. So native 4K, max everything except for path tracing, but including ray tracing at the non-path tracing max. So the high ray tracing settings. So looks like you can completely max out everything besides path tracing and stay over 60 FPS at 4K. Now, it is a 5090, but trust me, there's a lot of games that don't stay over 60 FPS maxed out even on a 5090. Now, I think path tracing will drop us down, but to kick that on, we are going to have to drop back into the game menu. Let's go ahead and kick the path tracing on. So, path tracing, yes. Upscaling, turn off frame generation, and what did it do? It dropped us into performance mode. So, let's go ahead and see how that does. So this is performance mode 4K upscaling with path tracing. but I did turn off the frame generation. But we can go ahead and go back to native resolution if we need to or want to. I think we'll test it out. Probably worth testing. Okay, so 4090, sorry, not 4090, 5090, 4K path tracing, performance mode DLSS, no frame generation. And, well, I mean, we are getting over 60 FPS. Now, it's also a 5090, so there is that. Man, if we are not going to be using performance mode upscaling, I think that 4K path tracing is just going to be off the table, even on a 5090. Let's go to balanced. What do we get? Yeah, we're going to be below 60 FPS, not by a lot. But yeah, balanced mode, and we are dropping below 60 FPS even on the 5090. Now, that being said, I really think at 4K res, I usually use performance mode DLSS. I think it looks pretty good these days, so there's that. But let's go to quality mode upscaling just to see what happens. Yeah, we're now down into the 40s. And then let's go ahead and try out native. Now, when you're in the path tracing mode, you have to use DLSS. There's no native TAA. So we'll have to go to DLAA, which is, I mean, going to look better anyway, but I'm just mentioning why I'm going that route. And we are under 30 frames per second, so 25 frames per second. So path tracing is no joke performance-wise. Let's go ahead and switch over to 1440p though. So 1440p path tracing, but we're using DLAA. So this is native 1440p path tracing. And actually, we're playable at 50-ish FPS here. So yeah, just 4K path tracing is just insanely difficult. 1440p path tracing, I mean, it's a 5090, and we're still under 60 FPS, but it was at least native resolution. Let's drop to DLSS quality and see what that does for us. Okay, now we're talking. We're in the mid-80s, and this is very responsive. So if you kick on like 2x frame gen or something from here, I think it's going to be just fine. So yeah, 5090 can definitely do 1440p path tracing. And I think that's all I've got for you guys today. I think overall the game looks really scalable. I think it's really cool that there is a path tracing mode, even if most people can't use it. The normal modes look great even without ray tracing and perform great. And even the normal non-path trace ray tracing modes aren't too crazy. Does look like VRAM's a bit of a concern in this game, so we're just going to want to make sure that you don't overdo it on settings that are VRAM heavy. Maybe look at textures, things like that if you're on an 8GB card, and even a 12GB card if you're kicking on the heavier ray tracing and path tracing modes. Might also want to keep an eye on some of those VRAM heavy settings. I need to go to bed. I hope all of you have an excellent day.